On Christmas Eve, 1945, while the rest of America slept peacefully, in West Virginia, a family of 11 walked through the gates of hell. A raging fire engulfed the Sodder family home in just 45 minutes. The parents managed to save 4 children, but the other 5 vanished. Completely, the police said they had been burned to death. But the truth was far more horrifying. Amidst the scorching ashes, not a single bone or button was found. The 5 children had vanished into thin air. For 20 years afterward, an anonymous photograph sent from the dead shocked the world. Were they burned alive? Or were they the victims of a cruel kidnapping plot by the Mafia? Join me as we delve into one of the most haunting cases in American history, the Sodder family mystery. Don't take your eyes off the screen, because the truth behind the final photograph will send shivers down your spine, revealing the power of love and the cruelty of fate. Fayetteville, West Virginia, 1945. As American soldiers began returning home from the brutal battlefields of World War II, the Christmas spirit enveloped the snow-covered hillsides. For the Sodder family, it should have been a night of rebirth and hope. Arthur Sterling, a proud Italian immigrant, stood gazing at his sturdy 2-story house, the culmination of years of hard labor in the coal mines. Inside, Jenny, his gentle wife, smiled as she watched their 9 children excitedly gathered around the Christmas tree. Laughter echoed through the wooden rooms. But, hidden behind the dazzling colored lights and the fragrant aroma of gingerbread, a specter of menace had been lurking around the house for weeks. George could never forget the strange man who had come knocking on his door in October. The man looked at the fuses and snarled, "Be careful, your house will burn down, and your children will be destroyed." At the time, George thought it was just a threat from an extremist who disliked his outspoken political views. Little did he know that darkness had begun to engulf his family from that moment on. On the night of December 24th, the clock struck midnight. The older children asked their mother for permission to stay up later to play with their new toys. Jenny agreed, reminding her eldest son, Morris, to close the chicken coop and turn off the lights before bed. Then she and George retreated to their room. 12:30 a.m. The telephone rang, shattering the silence of the holy night. Jenny picked up. On the other end was an unfamiliar woman's voice, accompanied by strange laughter and the clinking of glasses. "I'm looking for..." The woman said a name Jenny didn't recognize. "You've dialed the wrong number," Jenny replied softly. The woman let out another piercing laugh before hanging up. Jenny sighed, intending to go back to sleep, but noticed something strange. The lights were still on, the back door was unlocked, and the curtains were wide open, something her children never forgot to do. She quietly turned off the lights, closed the door, and returned to bed, reassuring herself that the children must have just fallen asleep on the sofa because they were too busy playing. 1:15 a.m., a dry, sharp sound echoed across the roof. It sounded like a heavy object falling and rolling across the wooden floor. Jenny woke up with a start, but then silence returned. She drifted back into a fitful sleep until the smell of smoke, not the warm, comforting smell of wood smoke from a fireplace, but the acrid smell of burning fabrics and wood. "George, wake up, there's a fire." Jenny's scream ripped through the night. Black smoke, like the tentacles of a demon, poured into the room through the cracks in the door. George sprang to his feet and rushed out into the hallway. The house, once a peaceful haven, had become a blazing furnace. Fire had erupted from the wooden staircase, cutting off access to the second floor, where 5 children were sleeping. In a fit of utter panic, George and Jenny, along with their 4 older children, rushed out into the freezing snow. George turned back, his face blazing with rage, shouting the names of the remaining 5 children: Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, Betty. There was no reply, only the crackling of wood and the roar of the flames engulfing everything. George lunged to the ladder he kept by the side of the house to climb to the second-floor window. The ladder had vanished. He ran to the garage, intending to start the engines of the 2 trucks, to use as makeshift supports against the wall. The trucks, which had been perfectly functioning that afternoon, were now completely immobile. They seemed as if they had been sabotaged by an invisible hand during the night. George knelt down on the white snow, his bare hand scorched from his desperate efforts to save his daughter. The bright red flame shone in the father's desperate eyes, while Jenny cried out in heart-wrenching helplessness. In just 45 minutes, the Sodder family home crumbled into a pile of glowing red ashes in the cold night. The next morning, as snow began to fall lightly on the ruins, a truth more horrifying than death itself was revealed. Not a single bone was found. The 5 children had vanished as if they had never existed. That Christmas held no miracles, only the heart-wrenching pain of fathers and mothers embarking on a half-century journey to find answers. Where were their children? On the morning of December 26, 1945, the town of Fayetteville was shrouded in an eerie silence. On the former site of the Sodder house, only a deep dark pit remained, filled with charred rafters and the acrid smell of loss. Arthur Sterling, his hands still wrapped in white bandages from burns, spent hours digging through the ashes with a shovel. He found nothing. Not a single bone, not a button, not a trace of his 5 beloved children. Local police and firefighters quickly concluded the fire was so intense it had completely incinerated the children's body. But George, with his fatherly instincts and tradesman's knowledge, knew it was a lie. A typical house fire couldn't possibly obliterate human bones in less than an hour. Grief didn't break George and Jenny. It transformed into a persistent flame of doubt. They began to notice inconsistencies. The family ladder had been found in a ditch 70 meters away. A local bus driver reported seeing fireballs thrown onto the Sodder roof, later identified as military pineapple bombs. From that day on, the Sodder family's life was no longer about living, but about waiting. A search spanning decades, George erected a giant billboard right on Highway 16, overlooking the old ruins. On the billboard were photos of the 5 children, Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty, accompanied by a plea: "Our family will never give up. Anyone with information about them, please save a broken family." Decades passed. The sign faded in the sun and snow. But Jenny's hope remained. She never wore colorful clothes again. Until the end of her life, she only wore black, the color of mourning, but also the color of reverence for the children she believed were still alive, somewhere out there. Every time there was an anonymous call, every time there was a rumor about a child resembling his own in Texas or Florida, George would set off. He spent every last penny, hiring one detective after another. Some scammers exploited their grief for money, but George simply said, "Even if there's a 1 in a million chance it's my child, I'll still go." Why haven't the bones of the 5 children been found? The most shocking theory is that the Italian Mafia kidnapped them before setting the fire. Take a look at these unmistakable details. The ladder. George intended to use the ladder to climb to the second-floor window to rescue his child, but the ladder disappeared. It was later found in a ditch 70 meters from the house. Someone had moved it. George started the engines of 2 trucks to use as makeshift barriers, but both, which had been working fine, suddenly broke down completely. Telephone lines. When Jenny tried to call for emergency services, the line had been completely cut. A witness saw a man cutting the telephone wires just as the fire started. Interview with the mysterious witness. Years later, a woman working at a hotel 50 miles away claimed to have seen 5 children with strange men speaking Italian the following morning. They looked terrified and weren't allowed to speak, she recounted. Why would the mafia do this? Kidnapping children is the most cruel punishment to teach a lesson to disobedient immigrants. They don't want to kill them. They want George and Jenny to live in regret and wait forever. Part 4. The Journey of Search and the Photograph from the Eternal Monument. Music. Melancholy. Profound. George and Jenny turned their grief into a battle. They erected a giant billboard on Highway 16, featuring the faces of the 5 children. From then on, Jenny only wore black, the color of mourning, but also a vow never to give up. In 1968, a photograph arrived from Kentucky. The boy in the picture had the same deep, expressive eyes as young Louis. Behind him was the code. Louis Sodder, Illo Boys. A 90,132. Many theories suggest that this young man was Louis, but that he had been brainwashed or threatened by the mafia to the point of being unable to return. A private investigator hired to find him took the money and vanished into thin air. The eerie silence of the local authorities further reinforces the theory that an underground network is covering up the truth. The fateful photograph from 1968, 23 years after that fateful night of fire. On a winter morning, in 1968, Jenny tremblingly opened an envelope with no sender's address, postmarked from Central City, Kentucky. Inside was a black and white portrait photograph. The world seemed to stop the moment Jenny saw that face. It was a young man, around 25, with dark curly hair, thick eyebrows, and a straight nose, unmistakable features of the Sodder bloodline. The man in the photo had deep, melancholic eyes, staring straight into the camera, as if trying to convey something. Behind the photograph were handwritten words in ink, illegible and mysterious. Julian's, "I love you, brother Frankie." The Illo Boys. A 90132 or 90,135, Jenny sobbed, pressing the photograph to her chest. "Louis, this is my Louis," she cried out, her voice choked with emotion. Louis, her youngest son, who had disappeared at the age of 9, was now a grown man. The photograph was more than just evidence. It was a salvation for her withering soul. George immediately hired a new private investigator and sent him to Kentucky to search for the boy in the photograph. They were full of hope that this time, the Christmas miracle had truly arrived 23 years late. But the cruelty of fate struck once again. The private investigator took the money, set off, and then vanished completely. All attempts to contact the investigator and track down the photograph proved fruitless. The young man in the photograph never appeared to explain the coded messages behind it. The meaning of perseverance in 1969, a year after receiving the photograph, Arthur Sterling passed away. Until his last breath, he asked Jenny, "Have you heard anything from the detective?" He died with an unfulfilled heart, but his heart had been somewhat warmed by the photograph of Louis. Eleanor Sterling lived for another 20 years. She transformed the burnt-out land into a vibrant garden of roses and rare flowers. She cared for them every day as if they were her own children. American audiences at the time often saw an old woman, dressed in black, standing silently beside a highway billboard, her gaze distant, looking towards the horizon. The story of the Sodder family is not just an unsolved kidnapping or arson case. It is a hymn to undying love. It teaches us that even when the whole world says your child is dead, even when the truth is buried beneath the deepest ashes, a father's and mother's hearts will still find a light to believe in. The 1968 photograph may be real, it may be a cruel joke, but for the Sodders, it was a sacred bond. It proved that death can burn down a house, but it can never burn down memories and hope. In 1989, Eleanor Sterling breathed her last, ending a 44-year journey of solitary pursuit of justice. She was buried next to her husband, George, leaving behind a rose garden and a mystery that has never been solved. When Jenny died, the billboard featuring the faces of 5 children on Highway 16 was finally taken down. The decaying wooden planks and faded photographs became part of West Virginia's history. But when the sign was taken down, the questions arose more strongly than ever. If the children hadn't died in the fire, where had they gone? And why never had they returned? Theories in the shadows. For decades, independent investigators and mystery enthusiasts have offered chilling theories to explain the disappearance of the 5 Sodder children. The most widely accepted theory involves the Italian Mafia. Arthur Sterling was an outspoken man who frequently criticized Mussolini's dictatorship in his homeland. At the time, the Italian community in West Virginia was plagued by underground groups. The theft of the ladder, the cutting of the telephone lines, and the vandalism of 2 trucks on Christmas Eve could not have been a coincidence. It was believed that the 5 children had been abducted before the fire broke out, as the cruelest punishment for George's disobedience. Another, more heartbreaking theory suggests the children were taken back to Italy to live a completely new life with new identities. The 1968 photograph, with the anonymous note about Louis, is living proof of this theory. But if that's true, why didn't Louis contact them directly? Perhaps he was threatened. Or was he brainwashed into believing his parents abandoned him in the fire that year? There are also theories that local authorities covered up the crime. Why did the private investigator disappear with the money? Why did the firefighters arrive so late? These questions create a fog that hangs over Fayetteville, turning the Sodder case into a black hole of truth. A legacy of pain and love. The Sodder family story didn't end with Jenny and George's deaths. It lives on in the heart of their only surviving child, Claire Sterling. Even in her final years, she passed away in 2021. Sylvia never gave up hope. She once said, "I never saw the bones in that fire. And until someone shows me real proof, I will continue to believe that my siblings are somewhere, growing old like me." What makes this case so haunting after nearly 80 years? It is the presence of the absent. Every Christmas season, people in the West Virginia hills tell stories of little ghosts scurrying through the snow. The Sodder story reminds us of the fragility of happiness. In just one Christmas Eve, from a happy family, they became wandering souls in the ashes of their own making. In conclusion, the flame never goes out. Imagine a late winter afternoon. You're driving down the deserted Highway 16. You see a vibrant rose garden on a patch of black earth. That's where Jenny stood. That's where George dug until his fingernails bled. The truth about Morris, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty may have been buried, along with their resilient parents. But another truth always shines through. The love of one's children is the only strength that can confront the darkness of uncertainty. The Sodder family case is a poignant tale of perseverance. It leaves us all with a valuable lesson. Never ignore warning signs, and cherish every moment with loved ones. Because the line between a warm dinner and an eternal nightmare can sometimes be as thin as a phone ringing in the night. The background music fades away. The sound of the wind howling rises. Perhaps, in some other dimension, The 5 Sodder children are still smiling under their Christmas tree in 1945, and their fire never broke out. But in this world, all we have left are old photographs, a mysterious anonymous letter, and a question that will forever remain unanswered. Where are the children? The Sodder story isn't about a fire that burned down a house, but about a love that no fire can burn. Hold your loved ones tight tonight, because sometimes the real miracle is simply that we still have each other.